Welcome everybody. A warm welcome to all of you. This is my first video lecture on fantasy literature and Antonie Saint-Exupéry's The Little Prince. We in this video lecture want to discuss about the features, about the characteristics of fantasy literature and why should we call Antonie Saint-Exupéry's The Little Prince as a classical example of fantasy literature. First of all, before discussing all these things, we must know about the meaning of the word fantasy. And here the meaning is written below, that fantasy is a kind of a human faculty, and this faculty is only found among the human beings. So fantasy is a human faculty that allows the human beings to imagine even those things which are literally improbable or which are literally impossible. Those things which are impossible and improbable to happen in reality. As a human being, if you are capable of imagining those things, I must say you have that fantasy, you have that faculty within your mind. If you are able to imagine that you can make a journey through space and you can reach to Mars and there you meet with the Martians, I must say you have that fantasy within your mind. So you have that faculty within you. Why am I saying all those things? Because in this particular novella we can come to see that how a human being gets the chance to meet with an alien, and an alien who came from an asteroid B612. An asteroid is almost like a small satellite. It's a smaller version of a planet. There are many asteroids, floating across the space or revolving around the sun, and asteroid B612 is one of them. And the little prince came from that particular planet, and then he reached to the desert of Sahara, and then he met with the narrator who is a pilot by profession. And this narrator met a ship accident. He had an Airbus, he had an aeroplane, and this Airbus met a fatal accident. And then the narrator tried to sort out the mechanical problem of that Airbus, but he was not able to sort it out. At that point of time, he met with the alien, the little prince. He looked almost like a mere baby. Yes or no? Not baby exactly. He looked like a child. He looked like a child, and he had that childish mentality. He had that childish innocence. Yes or no? And he met with the narrator, he met with the pilot. And we understand that this meeting that cannot happen regularly. This meeting is a rare thing. This meeting is a very surprising kind of thing. This cannot happen regularly in reality. So this particular meeting that takes the reader into the field of fantasy literature. And that is why the significance of the word fantasy has appeared very much prominent to the readers as well as to the critics. Whenever we read this basic reference, we read this basic introduction of this novel or novella, The Little Prince, when we come across that a human got the chance to meet with an alien. So before talking anything or before discussing anything about fantasy literature, let us know about the definition of fantasy literature. Here a line is written that fantasy literature is a genre that immerses readers in imaginative world filled with magic, filled with mythical creature and epic adventure. What does it mean? It means that in fantasy literature you come across about those creatures which are truly imaginative. Because here I just want to give some examples. Here I just want to give some examples from the story of the Little Prince. In the story, there is a king. He's a surprising king. He has a kind of an astounding behavior. Why? Because he thinks that he is the king, but he doesn't have any subject at all. He thinks that he is the king, but he doesn't have any subject at all. And here is a drunk man of a planet with whom the little prince met. And the drunk man instructs or give a moral instruction or a moral lesson to the little prince. The drinking is very much injurious to health, but he did not stop taking alcohol. He continued to take alcohol. So this is really very much surprising. In a planet, there are some trees. These trees are called baobabs. And these trees are truly dangerous. These trees can kill the entire planet. Yes or no? There is a rose, and the rose can talk. The rose can feel. The rose can fall in love with. There is a fox, and this fox has that kind of human faculty. So you understand that Antonie Expuery, he wants to explore even those things which have not at all any connection to reality, which are very much fantastical, which are very much imaginary, and which are those things which are literally impossible to imagine. So you need a kind of a faculty to imagine those things, right? The plot line in one word, if you ask me that what is the plot line of this particular novella, The Little Prince, then I must tell that the Little Prince is like a wanderer. The Little Prince is like a bohemian. He is traveling across many asteroids, and finally he came to this earth, and there he met with a human being. So imagine that he is traveling across the space, and he entered into one after another little planets, and there he met with the adults, and after meeting with the adults he came to know about the world of the adults, that the adults are materialistic. They have some vanity, they have ego, they have pride, and the little prince is surprised that how the world of the adults is completely different from the world of the children. Yes or no? So this is the allegorical implication of this particular story. But if you want to know that what is this story is about, this story is a surprising as well as a perplexing journey that is against the law of gravity, and which is again an important part of the definition of fantasy literature, because fantasy literature doesn't maintain any kind of logical analysis. It breaks all the rules of science. So now the little prince is traveling against gravity. He just breaks all the rules of gravity, all the rules of physics, and then he travels across the space, and then he makes journeys through various planets. Okay, and that is why I says that there are many magical references. The creatures are supernatural, the creatures are paranormal. There are some epic adventures. Let us start to discuss about the subgenres of fantasy literature. First comes what? First comes high fantasy or epic fantasy. So high fantasy, alternatively called to be epic fantasy. In simple words, try to understand that the content of high fantasy literature or epic fantasy literature that takes place into such a world which is purely fictional, such a world which is completely imaginary. The hero embarks through a very adventurous kind of journey. He faces multiple odds, he faces extreme difficulties, and finally he proves to be victorious. So high fantasy, the tone of high fantasy literature is heroic and adventurous. The setting of high fantasy literature is a fictional world. Exactly, there are many magical references, and the characters of high fantasy literature is very much chosen because they are heroic. They have many magical qualities, they have many heroic qualities. The kind of heroes which we come across mainly in the epics, right? Now comes the second category, and the second category or the second division is called low fantasy. Low fantasy is what? It simply refers to a real world. Listen to me carefully. Where in epic fantasy or high fantasy, we all come across the fictional world or the imaginary world, but in low fantasy, we come across the real world, but in this real world, there are many fantasy elements. So, the imaginary elements are found within the real world. The mysteries are found within the society. Yeah, the mysteries are hidden, the mysteries are rare, the mysteries are secret things which are kept far away from social community. For example, the stories of Harry Potter, yeah, definitely fall into this category of literature, low fantasy literature. Or the novella, that is a part of our syllabus, The Little Prince. It falls into low fantasy literature. Why? Because you understand that the setting of the story is real. You see a pilot, and this pilot met an accident, and then the pilot eventually met with an alien, and this alien came from B612. I repeat, B612. This is the name of an asteroid. So that is why the second point is very much important, which is called low fantasy. And then came the third point, which is called dark fantasy. Dark fantasy is a type of a literary work, or dark fantasy literature refers to those literary works which are serious, which are grim, where the stories are horror infused, where the stories are very much gothic in setting, which are dark, which are somber, which are extremely tragic. And the characters, for example, the characters in high fantasy literature, the heroes are epical. In low fantasy literature, the characters are ordinary, not so extraordinary, but they encounter the supernatural. For example, the narrator of The Little Prince met with an alien, right? But in dark fantasy, all these characters are mainly the anti-heroes. They are the flawed characters. They have multiple faults within themselves. The theme of corruption, the theme of moral decay, the social anarchy, all these things are mainly presented or are mainly portrayed through this particular type of literary work called dark fantasy. We will discuss about the last two fantasies. One is urban fantasy, another is mythic fantasy. The very name urban fantasy, it clearly suggests or indicates that the stories, unlike the high fantasy where the stories take place in a completely fictional world, the stories of urban fantasy mainly take place in real world. It may take place in the fictional metropolis where magic exists, where the magical reference exists, but all these magical references are mainly hidden, or all these magical things are kept far away from the eyes of the general people, okay, or from the eyes of the general public. And at last comes mythic fantasy, where we say that the stories are mainly inspired by the ancient myths, and where we also come across about the legendary characters. Now let us start to know why is The Little Prince called to be a popular example of this genre known as fantasy literature. The first point, you all can see the presence of the magic and supernatural. I mean, the presence of the magical elements and the supernatural elements. There are ample references within the text by which you can reach to the conclusion that there are many magical and supernatural references. One such reference is that the Little Prince is a space traveler. He is journeying across the space. He left one planet, he entered into another planet, He left one asteroid and then he entered into the next asteroid. He came from the asteroid B612 and then he could go to B613, B625, B629. He could travel, various asteroids. Yes or no? So it clearly certifies that he has the power to travel through the space, and which is literally magical. The second one is that his power or the ability to talk to the animals. He can talk to the animals. Yes or no? He can fall in love with the roach. Right? Even at the end of the story, he can mysteriously disappear. Even at the end of the story, he can mysteriously disappear. All these things are not natural. All these things are not natural. All these things are somehow magical and supernatural. Now, let us start to discuss about the second point. That we at the beginning of the story, or we at the beginning of the discussion, we say that the presentation of the imaginary world. The story takes place in a fantastical world where the little prince journeys from his little home. That's the home planet. It was called the home planet, B612. This is the home planet of the little prince. This is the home planet of the little prince. And then he started to visit to the other surreal planets. Yes or no? And we understand that every planet has a kind of a unique environment. Every planet has a kind of a unique inhabitant. For example, there is a lamplighter who follows the absurd rules. There is the reference of more than 40 times of sun rising and sunset in a country. The actor, one can see sunrise at the time one wants to see. One can see the sunset at the time one wants to see. Such a thing happens. So this is nothing but the portrayal of the imaginary world. The little prince embarks on a journey through the universe. He seeks wisdom. He meets with many people. He learns many things about human nature. A journey can be called heroic if this journey lets anyone to explore many things of life. So this journey is definitely heroic because little prince is capable of knowing many ideas about life, about the human beings from this particular journey. Now, we must know about the next point, the scuffle, the fundamental scuffle between good and evil. As you all know, that life is a constant battlefield where light and darkness are fighting continuously. In this story, there is not at all the description of any conventional battle. But the more the little prince is moving forward, the more he is getting the chance to meet with the matured and the adults. And immediately he understood how the adult were being led continuously by the principles of profit and loss. The adults are very much greedy. They do have that, they have that vanity. They they cannot keep the purity in their hearts. But this little prince, a mere boy, is very much pure from the point of the heart. He looks with wondrous eyes to all the objects and he is fascinated. When you can remember the very first chapter of the book, when the narrator's painting was not appreciated by anyone. Nobody ever appreciated our narrator, the pilot's painting quality or pilot's painting ability. But it is the little prince who first came and then appreciated the pilot's painting quality. What does it show? It shows that the little prince is a gold-hearted boy. It shows that the little prince is a genuine boy. He knows how to appreciate others, whereas the adults have forgotten to appreciate and to admire others. But the little prince has not forgotten that. The little prince knows how to appreciate others, how to admire others. And thus I must say that little prince is definitely is the symbol of all the good things, of all the good things of the world. And finally comes the reference of the mythical creatures. Just like I told ago that in this story there is not at all the presence of any conventional fighting between the good things and the evil. In the same way, while discussing this point, the point of the mythical creatures, I must tell that there are no such mythical creatures in this particular text. But the way the fox is presented, that this fox has human qualities, or the way the rose is presented, that the rose is a pampering flower. The rose starts to flirt with the little prince. If you can remember the chapter, you understand that how the rose is complaining, how the rose is telling continuously the little prince that at least take some initiatives to protect me, water me. I don't like much air. Little prince is fascinated. Little prince is surprised after noticing the beauty of such a flower. Immediately he fell in love. Right? This rose is extremely fearful of the animals, because this rose thinks that she can be eaten by the animal, and she tells that she has her thorns, and with the help of the thorns she can pierce the throat of the other animals. So you understand that this rose is not typically a rose, but a representative of a omen. And whenever we would read about the behavior of the fox, we understand that the fox is not at all a fox. It is again a representative of a human being. So a fantasy literature can be a story that is purely fictional, that is purely imaginary, but it teaches the readers about the behavior of the human beings, about the multiple factors of the world.